Lucy wasn't supposed to be here. Or at least, that's what her mom had always told her. The bustling crowd, the flashing lights, and the sound of excited voices seemed so far away from the quiet little town she came from. She had never been to a place like this, a tech event where everyone wore shiny suits and talked about things she couldn't even begin to understand. But here she was, standing on the edge of the crowd, with wide eyes and an old necklace clutched tightly in her hand. She had arrived with her aunt, who had a business in Silicon Valley, but Lucy felt out of place. The towering glass buildings, the fancy gadgets on display, the influential tech leaders walking past her without a second glance, it all felt so alien. Lucy's mind wandered as she touched the pendant hanging around her neck. Her mom had given it to her before she passed away, and the simple charm was all she had left of her. "Are you okay, sweetie?" her aunt's voice broke through Lucy's reverie. Lucy smiled up at her, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just thinking about Mom," she replied softly. Her aunt patted her head. "I know, honey. But this is a big opportunity for you. This event is full of people who are changing the world. Maybe you'll even meet someone who can inspire you." Lucy wasn't sure about that. People here seemed too busy to notice a little girl with a simple necklace. But then, as if by chance, her eyes locked onto someone in the crowd, and her heart skipped a beat. There he was. Elon Musk. Lucy had heard his name before. Everyone knew who he was the man who was sending rockets to space, who made electric cars cool, who changed the way people thought about technology. But seeing him in person, that was something else. He was standing near a group of people, talking animatedly, and yet Lucy found herself drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. Maybe it was because he seemed so human, despite all his achievements. Or maybe it was just the way he carried himself, calm, collected, yet undeniably powerful. Without thinking, Lucy found herself walking toward him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what she was going to say. She just knew she had to ask him something. The people around her seemed to part like the Red Sea, and before she knew it, Lucy stood in front of him, her small body barely reaching his chest. She looked up at him, and the words just spilled out. "Mr. Musk, do you think my necklace is special too?" Elon Musk blinked, clearly taken aback by the question. He turned his attention fully to the little girl standing in front of him, her big brown eyes filled with curiosity. "Your necklace?" he asked, his voice soft and approachable despite his reputation for being one of the world's most influential men. Lucy nodded eagerly, clutching the necklace in her small hands. "My mom gave it to me before she went away," she said, her voice trailing off. She wasn't sure why she was telling him this, but something about him made her feel safe. Elon's expression softened as he took in the simple charm that dangled from her neck. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Instead, he knelt down to her level, his eyes studying the necklace with a quiet intensity. "That's a very special necklace," he finally said, his voice low. "It's not just a piece of jewelry. It carries with it a lot of meaning, doesn't it?" Lucy's eyes widened. She hadn't expected him to understand. "My mom said it would remind me of her. And when I wear it, I feel like she's still with me," Lucy explained. She could feel the lump in her throat, the emotions swirling inside her chest. Do you think I'll ever forget her?" Elon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step back, his gaze thoughtful. "No," he said quietly. "I don't think you'll ever forget her. Some things, like love, don't go away. Even when people are no longer with us, their love stays in our hearts. And that necklace?" He pointed at it gently. "It's a reminder that love never really leaves." Lucy blinked, feeling the heat rise in her cheeks. She wasn't sure what she had expected, but it certainly wasn't this. Here she was, standing in front of one of the most famous men in the world, and he was talking to her like he understood exactly what she was going through. It made her feel understood. "I miss her so much," Lucy whispered, her voice shaking slightly. "I know you do," Elon said, his eyes kind and sincere. "But remember this, your mom gave you that necklace because she wanted you to keep it close. She knew you would need it, especially when life gets hard. And even though she's not here, she's still part of everything you do. The love she gave you, that stays with you. You carry it with you, just like you carry that necklace." Lucy felt a tear slip down her cheek, and before she knew it, she was crying. She didn't care that she was in front of all these important people. She didn't care that the crowd was watching. In that moment, all she could think about was her mom, and how much she wished she could hear her voice again, feel her embrace. Elon gently placed a hand on her shoulder, offering the kind of comfort that only someone who understood true loss could provide. "It's okay to miss her," he said softly. "And it's okay to cry. It's a sign of how much you loved her. But you'll be okay. She's always with you." Lucy wiped her eyes, feeling the weight in her chest lift just a little. She didn't feel so alone anymore. As the crowd around them continued to murmur and move, Lucy felt a sense of calm wash over her. She had come to this event not knowing what to expect, but now she knew one thing for certain: the love she had for her mom wasn't something that would fade. It would stay with her forever, just like the necklace around her neck. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at Elon. Elon smiled warmly. "Anytime, kiddo. Anytime." As Lucy turned to walk back to her aunt, she glanced down at the necklace one more time. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry anymore. It was a symbol of everything she held dear, everything she would carry with her for the rest of her life. And somehow, just knowing that, made the world feel a little less overwhelming. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Lucy had always been a quiet girl, the kind who didn't ask for attention but always found herself looking up to those around her, especially her mother. Her world had once been simple, filled with afternoons spent in their small apartment with her mom reading stories, baking cookies, and talking about everything from her mom's childhood to Lucy's big dreams. But that world had been shattered when her mother passed away. It had been a sudden and painful loss. One day, her mom had been fine, laughing, talking, and making dinner, just like any other evening. The next day, she was gone. No warning, no goodbyes. Just a quiet hospital room and a void that Lucy would never be able to fill. Her aunt, who was kind but a little overwhelmed, had taken Lucy in after the funeral. While she loved her aunt and her cousins, it wasn't the same. It wasn't home. And every corner of the apartment reminded Lucy that her mom was gone. The walls of their little place, which had once felt warm and full of life, now felt like a cold reminder of what she had lost. When Lucy was younger, she used to spend hours in her mom's bedroom, pulling out old photo albums and listening to her mom's stories. She remembered how her mom would laugh and tell her, "You're going to be great one day, Lucy. You just wait and see." But that was before. Now, the photos on the walls no longer held any joy, they only served as constant reminders that Lucy would never get to hear those stories again. That she would never again hear her mom's voice. But the one thing her mom had left her, the one piece of her that Lucy could hold on to forever, was the necklace. It wasn't anything fancy. The pendant was a simple, silver heart, with a small engraving on the back, "Always and forever, with love." It had been her mother's before it became Lucy's, a cherished keepsake passed down from generation to generation. Her mother had worn it every day, just as Lucy did now. At school, the kids would often ask about it, wondering where she got such a fancy necklace. But Lucy never told them the full truth. How could she? To them, it was just a piece of jewelry. To Lucy, it was everything. It was her mother's memory, her love, and her strength, all wrapped up in a simple piece of silver. Lucy's aunt had tried to console her in the months following her mother's death, taking her on trips, enrolling her in activities, anything to distract her. But nothing seemed to help. Not the ballet lessons, the art classes, or the weekend trips to the zoo. Lucy was still stuck in her grief, her heart weighed down by the unbearable silence that followed her mother's absence. Her aunt would often remind her, "Your mom would want you to be happy, Lucy. She would want you to enjoy life, even though she's not here. She would want you to live to the fullest." But Lucy had a hard time understanding that. How could she live a full life without the one person who had meant everything to her? How could she laugh, or even smile, when her heart was broken in ways no one could fix? She had tried to push the sadness down, to smile and pretend like everything was fine, but it never worked. Not when she was alone, not when she saw the other kids laughing and talking with their parents. That was why she had kept to herself so much. At school, she'd always sit in the back of the classroom, her fingers tracing the heart-shaped pendant under her shirt, wishing that if she just concentrated hard enough, she could somehow feel her mother's presence. Sometimes, when no one was looking, she'd close her eyes and pretend that her mom was still there, sitting next to her on the couch, holding her close. But deep down, she knew that wasn't possible. Her mom was gone. And Lucy was left to try to navigate a world that seemed so much colder without her. Still, there were moments, fleeting moments, when the memory of her mom would spark a sense of warmth inside Lucy. Like when she'd look at the stars, or hear her mom's favorite song play on the radio. Those moments reminded her that she wasn't entirely alone. That somewhere, her mom was watching over her. It was in these quiet moments that Lucy found comfort. The thought that maybe, just maybe, her mom wasn't gone completely. Maybe she was still with her in some way. But those moments were rare. And when they ended, Lucy was left with the heavy silence again. So, when her aunt had brought her to the tech event, Lucy hadn't really expected anything to change. It was just another attempt to distract her, another attempt to push the sadness aside. But, as it turned out, this event would turn out to be different than all the rest. Little did Lucy know that the day she met Elon Musk would change everything for her. That a simple question about a necklace, a piece of jewelry she had held so closely for so long, would lead her to a moment of understanding, one that would help her find a new sense of hope, something she hadn't even known she was looking for. And so, as she stood there in the midst of the crowd, feeling small yet strangely empowered, Lucy clutched the necklace close to her heart. It was the only thing she had left from her mom. It was her anchor, the one piece of her old life she hadn't been able to let go of. But maybe, just maybe, the person she was about to meet could help her find a new beginning. A way forward. Her heart still ached, but in that moment, there was a glimmer of hope. Maybe things weren't as impossible as they seemed. Maybe, just maybe, the love her mother had left her could still guide her through the dark. And that was the first step toward healing. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days following the tech event were a blur for Lucy. Everything felt different, strange, even. It wasn't just the shock of meeting Elon Musk or the kindness he had shown her, though that was still on her mind. It was something deeper, something she couldn't quite put into words. When she returned home with her aunt, things felt off. The world seemed louder, harsher, even though she was back in her familiar surroundings. The apartment, once a place of quiet comfort, now felt like a place she couldn't escape from. It wasn't that she didn't love her aunt, she did. It wasn't even that her cousins weren't nice to her. But everything had changed. She had always known her life would never be the same without her mom. But meeting Elon had stirred something inside her, a feeling she hadn't realized was there before. The hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. That she could find something to fill the empty space in her heart, even if it meant learning how to live with the sadness. It was a feeling that stuck with her, nagging at her every time she sat down to eat, every time she saw her reflection in the mirror. There was an urgency now, a quiet whisper in the back of her mind that urged her to take action, to somehow fix everything that felt broken. But where could she begin? Her aunt noticed the change in her, too. Lucy had become more distant in the days after the event. She didn't talk as much during dinner, didn't play with her cousins like she used to. Even when they tried to get her to do something fun, like watch a movie or play a game, Lucy just couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. "Lucy, honey," her aunt said one evening as they sat on the couch, "I know it's been hard for you. I can see that you're struggling. But we're all here for you, okay? You don't have to go through this alone." Lucy nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She had been trying to think of ways to honor her mother's memory, ways to keep her spirit alive, but nothing felt right. How could she move on when the memory of her mom was so painfully close, yet so far away? How could she continue living her life when her heart was stuck in the past? It was then that she realized something that made her stomach drop. She hadn't really given her mom a proper goodbye. She had never had the chance to say all the things she had wanted to say before her mother passed away. And maybe, just maybe, that was why she felt so lost. Her mom's love had been her anchor, but now it felt like the anchor had been pulled up, leaving her to drift in an ocean of uncertainty. As the days passed, Lucy's thoughts became more erratic, more disjointed. She began to feel frustrated, like she was stuck in a cycle she couldn't escape from. She had so many questions, so many things she didn't understand. Why did her mom have to leave so suddenly? Why had she been taken away when there was still so much left to do, so many memories to make? And then there was the matter of the necklace. Lucy found herself tracing the pendant more and more, clinging to it as if it were her only lifeline. Her mom's words echoed in her mind, always and forever, with love. But was that enough? Could it be enough to fill the hole her mom had left? It was late one night when it hit her. She had been lying in bed, staring up at the ceiling, trying to quiet her racing thoughts, when the idea came to her. What if she could do something big? Something that would honor her mom's memory in a way that felt complete? What if she could take the lessons her mom had taught her, about strength, resilience, and love, and apply them to her own life? What if she could use the opportunity she had been given to not just move forward, but to make a difference? To somehow become the person her mom had always believed she could be? The idea felt as if it had dropped into her mind from nowhere, but the more Lucy thought about it, the more it made sense. Maybe her mom hadn't just given her the necklace as a keepsake. Maybe it was a reminder to live, to push through the difficult times, to rise above the pain. Maybe the necklace wasn't just a symbol of love, it was a symbol of the strength her mother had passed down to her. The rising conflict now wasn't just with the world around her, it was within herself. Lucy had spent so much time holding on to the past, letting her grief define her. But in that moment, she realized that she had been holding herself back. She was waiting for things to get better, for the pain to subside. But maybe, just maybe, she had the power to make things better herself. But that would mean facing the one thing she had been avoiding all along, the uncertainty of life without her mom. It meant stepping into a world that felt too big, too overwhelming, and doing it without the one person who had always been there to guide her. Could she do it? Could she find the courage to move forward, to live the life her mom had always wanted her to? Or would she let her fear and grief continue to hold her back, keeping her trapped in a past that no longer existed? The weight of this realization hung heavily in the air, and Lucy felt a rush of emotions flood over her. She wanted to do more than just survive. She wanted to thrive. But first, she would need to take that first step, a step into the unknown. And so, with a deep breath, Lucy made a decision. She wouldn't wait for things to get better. She would make them better. She would carry the love her mom had given her and use it to push forward, no matter how hard it was. She had the necklace, and now, it was time to let its true meaning guide her. The rising conflict, the battle within Lucy, was just beginning. And though the road ahead seemed unclear, one thing was certain, Lucy wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not ever. It was the following week when the opportunity Lucy had been waiting for, although she didn't know it yet, would finally present itself. She was standing at the bus stop after school, her backpack slung over her shoulder, the silver necklace resting against her skin. Her fingers subconsciously traced the pendant, the cool metal providing a small amount of comfort in the midst of her thoughts. The weather was crisp, the trees shedding their autumn leaves, and the air was filled with the scent of change. Lucy couldn't help but feel that something in her life was about to shift, though she didn't know in what way. Her aunt had been encouraging her to talk to someone outside of the family, someone who could help her process her grief and feelings. Sometimes, it helps to talk to a stranger, her aunt had said. Someone who won't judge you, someone who can offer a different perspective. At first, Lucy had been reluctant. She wasn't sure how talking to some random person could help her deal with the weight of her grief. She wanted her mother, not a therapist. But after several weeks of feeling the same emptiness, she decided she might as well give it a shot. That afternoon, her aunt had taken her to a nearby community center, where a support group for young people dealing with loss met every week. Lucy hadn't wanted to go at first, feeling hesitant and unsure about what to expect. But her aunt insisted, reminding her that it was important to try new things. Lucy sat down in the small room, the chairs arranged in a circle. There were a few other teens her age, though none of them seemed to look at her directly. They were all lost in their own worlds, their faces tired, worn. The room was silent at first, the quiet hum of fluorescent lights filling the space. And then, the facilitator, a middle-aged man with a warm smile and kind eyes, spoke. "Hi, everyone. My name is Paul. I know most of you, but for those of you new to the group, welcome. You're not alone here. We're all working through grief, and we're here to support one another." Lucy felt her stomach tighten. She wasn't sure she was ready for this. She didn't know how to open up to strangers about the gaping hole in her heart. How could she explain the weight of her sadness when no one truly understood the depth of her pain? But then something happened that she hadn't expected. After Paul spoke, he opened the floor for anyone who wanted to share their story. A few of the kids spoke up, recounting the losses they had experienced, parents, siblings, even pets. But when Lucy's turn came, she found herself unable to speak. Her throat tightened, and the words felt stuck, like they were lodged in the pit of her stomach. She reached for her necklace, her fingers curling around it for comfort. The familiar weight of it gave her the tiniest bit of strength, enough to look up and meet Paul's eyes. "It's okay," Paul said softly, sensing her hesitation. "No pressure. But if you're ready, we're all here to listen." Something inside Lucy shifted. She had been holding her emotions in for so long, bottling them up inside, trying to pretend everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. And for once, she didn't have to hide it. I lost my mom," Lucy said, her voice wavering. "It happened suddenly. She just wasn't here anymore. And I don't know how to live without her." The words spilled out of her, and the room was silent as Lucy's chest tightened with emotion. Her voice trembled, but she couldn't stop. She needed to say it. She needed to feel heard, even if only for a moment. "I've been trying so hard to be okay," she continued, her fingers still tightly clutching the necklace. "But it's like, everything feels wrong now. Like I'm lost. I don't know how to keep going without her." As the words left her mouth, Lucy's eyes welled with tears. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding in, how much pain she had carried with her every day. It was as though the floodgates had been opened, and all the emotions she had suppressed for so long came rushing out. But what happened next surprised her. One by one, the other teens began to speak. Some of them were older, others younger, but they all had one thing in common: they understood. They knew what it was like to lose someone important, to feel like you were standing in a dark, empty room with no way out. Lucy listened as they shared their stories of pain, of anger, of confusion. It wasn't easy to hear, but it helped. It reminded her that she wasn't the only one going through this. And, in some strange way, it made her feel less alone. By the time the meeting ended, Lucy's mind was racing. She hadn't expected to feel the way she did, lighter, almost as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. There was still pain, still sadness, but for the first time in months, she felt like she wasn't carrying it alone. That night, as she walked home with her aunt, Lucy felt different. She wasn't sure what had shifted, whether it was the act of talking about her grief or the shared understanding of others, but something had changed. As they approached their apartment, her aunt turned to her with a small, encouraging smile. "You did great today, Lucy," she said. "I'm proud of you for being brave enough to talk." Lucy nodded silently, a quiet smile tugging at the corner of her lips. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear: she was on the beginning of a journey. A journey not just toward healing, but toward understanding her strength, her ability to grow beyond the pain. And maybe, just maybe, this journey would lead her to a place where she could finally understand the true meaning of the necklace she wore, where the love of her mother and the lessons she had learned would help guide her through the darkest moments. Lucy woke up the next morning with a strange sense of clarity. The heaviness in her chest that had been suffocating her for so long had lightened just a little. It wasn't gone, she knew that much. Grief didn't disappear overnight, but for the first time, she felt like she was taking steps forward. Her mom's necklace still lay on her nightstand, its silver chain gleaming faintly in the morning light. She reached for it, letting it rest against her fingers for a moment before clasping it around her neck. The necklace, a symbol of her mother's love, had somehow become a grounding force in her life, reminding her that her mom was still with her in spirit. But Lucy knew now that it was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a reminder to live, to keep moving forward, even when the world seemed too dark. As she prepared for school, Lucy couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Her usual routine felt distant, as if she were moving through it in a haze, like a character in a movie she couldn't quite grasp. But today, the world felt different. More vibrant, more alive. Maybe it was because she had finally shared her grief. Maybe it was because she had made the decision to confront her pain rather than bury it. Either way, something had shifted. When Lucy arrived at school, her thoughts were preoccupied with what she had learned the night before. The support group had been an unexpected turning point. She had heard the other teens' stories of loss. Some had lost their parents, others their siblings, and in every story, she saw pieces of her own. They understood her pain, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. There was a certain power in shared grief, a quiet solidarity that made the burden a little more bearable. It was during lunch that the emotional climax of her day occurred, something Lucy could never have anticipated. She was sitting alone at her usual spot, staring out the window at the sea of students going about their day. Her mind was still swirling, trying to make sense of everything, when she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning around, she was surprised to see Noah, one of the boys from the support group. He was tall, with messy brown hair and dark eyes that had seen too much for someone his age. But there was something gentle about him, a quiet understanding that made him approachable despite the weight of his own grief. "Hey, Lucy," he said softly. "Mind if I sit here?" Lucy hesitated for a moment. She wasn't used to people, especially strangers, reaching out to her like this. But there was something different about Noah. Something she couldn't quite explain. "Sure," she replied, scooting over slightly to make room for him. Noah sat down, and for a moment, they didn't speak. There was no need for small talk. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the understanding that neither of them needed to pretend to be okay. After a few moments, Noah broke the silence. "I just wanted to check in," he said, his voice low but sincere. "You seemed to open up a lot last night, and I thought, well, maybe you could use someone to talk to. I get it, you know. Sometimes the weight of it all can be too much to carry alone." Lucy felt her heart tighten in her chest. It wasn't often that people understood her like this. It wasn't often that someone truly saw the struggle behind her quiet exterior. "I don't know if I'm ready to talk about it again," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "It's like everything inside me is just stuck." Noah nodded, his expression kind. "Yeah. I get that. I felt the same way for a while. It's like, you don't know how to move forward. But it's important to remember, you don't have to have all the answers right now. Grief doesn't have a timeline. You'll figure it out, step by step." Lucy looked down at the table, her fingers once again tracing the necklace her mom had given her. The words, "always and forever," with love, echoed in her mind, a reminder that her mother's love hadn't vanished, it was still there, lingering like a soft whisper. But even as she clung to that love, she felt a deep sense of loss. And suddenly, the tears that had been building for weeks began to spill. It wasn't just the memory of her mom, it was the overwhelming realization that she had been running from her grief for so long. She had been too afraid to face it. Too afraid to let go of the idea that somehow, if she held on to her sadness tightly enough, her mom would come back. Noah didn't say anything as the tears fell. He simply sat there, offering her the silent support she desperately needed. "I miss her so much," Lucy whispered through the tears. "I don't know how to live without her. I don't know how to let go." Noah's voice was soft but steady as he spoke. "It's not about letting go, Lucy. It's about learning how to live with it. You're never going to forget her. But you can find a way to carry her memory with you, to honor her in a way that lets you keep moving forward." Lucy wiped her eyes, her chest still heavy with grief. But Noah's words, simple as they were, pierced through the cloud of confusion in her mind. It wasn't about forgetting or moving on completely. It was about learning how to live with the pain, how to let it coexist with the love she had for her mother. For the first time since her mom had passed, Lucy felt like she was beginning to understand. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about carrying the past with her, allowing it to shape her future, but not letting it define her every moment. She took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the necklace. "Thank you, Noah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can do it yet, but I think I'm starting to understand." Noah gave her a small smile, his dark eyes filled with quiet understanding. "You will," he said gently. "And remember, it's okay to take it one day at a time." In that moment, everything felt a little clearer. The emotional climax had arrived in the form of raw, unexpected vulnerability. Lucy had let herself feel the depth of her pain, and though the weight of grief still pressed heavily on her heart, she now knew that she didn't have to face it alone. She had the strength of others, her mom's memory, and now, Noah's quiet support, to help guide her through the darkest moments. And with that realization, the road ahead no longer seemed as daunting. The next few weeks passed in a blur for Lucy. There were moments of calm, of peaceful reflection, but there were also days when the sadness returned with the same ferocity as it had in the beginning. Grief, Lucy was learning, wasn't linear. It didn't come in neat stages. Some days she felt strong enough to take on the world, while others, she barely felt capable of getting out of bed. But one thing had changed, she no longer felt as though she was completely alone in her journey. It was as if a light had begun to shine through the cracks in her heart, illuminating the path forward, even when it seemed impossibly dark. Her meetings at the support group became something she looked forward to, though they were far from easy. Each time, Lucy found herself opening up a little more, revealing more layers of her grief, and feeling less and less ashamed of it. Her bond with the other teens in the group grew, and they began to offer each other words of encouragement, their shared experiences creating a quiet camaraderie. But there was something else that began to shift within Lucy during this time, a sense of peace. It wasn't something she could explain clearly, but it was there. She had come to realize that grief would always be a part of her, but it didn't have to define who she was. Her mother's memory, her love, was still a part of her. And though the pain of losing her would never disappear, Lucy could learn to live with it, to honor it, and to allow it to shape her into a stronger person. One particular afternoon, after school, Lucy sat in her room, staring at the silver necklace lying on her desk. She had taken to wearing it every day, the cool metal reminding her of her mom's love, even when the days felt long and exhausting. It had become a symbol not just of loss, but of strength. The chain, though delicate, was strong, just as she was learning to be. Lucy had been contemplating a big decision for a while now. She had been thinking about what Noah had said to her weeks earlier, the idea that grief wasn't about letting go, but about learning to live with it. She wanted to honor her mother in a way that felt right, that felt like she could keep moving forward with her mom's spirit guiding her. That evening, Lucy took the necklace in her hands and carefully clasped it around her neck. She had been thinking about a way to give back, a way to keep her mom's legacy alive while also healing from the pain of her loss. Her mom had always believed in the power of helping others, in spreading kindness, and Lucy knew that she could carry that forward. It wasn't much, she thought. But it was a start. The next day, at the support group meeting, Lucy shared her decision with the others. "I've decided to do something in my mom's memory," she said, her voice filled with a quiet conviction. She was always helping others, always spreading kindness. "So, I'm going to start volunteering at the local shelter. It's something I think she would have wanted me to do." The room was silent for a moment as the others absorbed her words. Then, one by one, they nodded, their faces reflecting the understanding that Lucy wasn't just healing herself, she was finding a way to give something back, to take her grief and turn it into something meaningful. Noah spoke up first. "That's really great, Lucy," he said, his voice warm. "It's hard to find a way to move forward after something like this. But what you're doing is incredible. I think your mom would be proud." Lucy smiled at him, a tear slipping down her cheek. She had been so afraid of losing her connection to her mother, of forgetting her in some way. But now, with this new chapter beginning, one where she would be helping others just as her mother had, it felt like a way to keep that connection alive. After the meeting, Lucy walked home with a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be days when the grief would return, when the pain would feel fresh. But she had learned something important in the past few months, that she had the strength to carry on, even when things seemed impossible. When she got home, Lucy sat down at her desk, staring at the necklace again. This time, she didn't feel sadness. Instead, she felt a deep, abiding sense of love. Her mom's love, her guidance, and her strength were with her in every moment, every step she took. She had learned to carry that love with her, just as she had learned to carry her grief. Both were a part of her now, intertwined in ways she could never have imagined before. And though she would always miss her mom, Lucy knew that her memory, her spirit, was something she could continue to honor, not just in moments of sadness, but in moments of joy, too. With a deep breath, Lucy looked out the window, watching the sun begin to set on the horizon. It was a new beginning. It was a new chapter in her life. And for the first time in a long time, Lucy felt hopeful. It was a few weeks after Lucy had decided to volunteer at the local shelter when things started to feel like they were truly shifting. The grief was still there, there were days when the ache of losing her mom felt fresh, and moments when the emptiness threatened to swallow her whole. But volunteering had brought a sense of purpose into her life, something she hadn't realized she was missing until she found it. The shelter, a small but warm place in the heart of the city, had been in desperate need of help. Lucy spent her weekends there, sorting donations, organizing events, and helping the staff with anything they needed. At first, it was difficult. The sight of families coming in for assistance, the sadness in their eyes, reminded her of the vulnerability of life. It made her realize how fragile everything truly was, and how much her mom had done to help others, despite the challenges they faced at home. But as the weeks went on, Lucy began to notice a subtle change in herself. It wasn't just the feeling of helping that was making a difference, it was the way it allowed her to feel connected again. Not just to her mother, but to the world around her. She had been so focused on her own grief for so long that she hadn't realized how much she had been shutting herself off from everyone else. In the shelter, Lucy was surrounded by people who were struggling, people who had experienced their own losses and challenges. They didn't ask her to be strong or to pretend that everything was fine. They simply accepted her for who she was, and in doing so, they made it easier for her to accept herself. One of the most memorable moments came on a rainy Saturday afternoon when Lucy was helping a young boy named Ethan find a jacket. Ethan was about 7 years old, with big brown eyes and messy hair. He had been coming to the shelter with his mother for a few weeks, and he had become a familiar face. His mother was a single parent, struggling to make ends meet, and Lucy had noticed the way the little boy always clung to her. "Hey, Ethan," Lucy said, crouching down to his level. "What's up, buddy?" Ethan looked up at her, his face pale and drawn from the long hours spent in the shelter. "I can't find a jacket. The one I had, it's too small." Lucy smiled softly, understanding how important something as simple as a jacket could be. "I think we can find you one," she said, leading him over to the donations area. As they walked through the rows of clothing, Lucy couldn't help but notice how much the boy reminded her of herself at that age. She had always been the quiet one, the one who clung to her mom for reassurance. She thought of how she would have felt if her mom were still here, how she would have wanted her to be safe and warm. After a few minutes of searching, Lucy found a jacket that seemed to be just the right size for Ethan. It was a navy blue hoodie, warm and soft, and it would fit him perfectly. Ethan's eyes lit up when he saw it, and he immediately slipped into it, smiling brightly. "Thanks, Lucy," Ethan said, his voice full of gratitude. Lucy patted him on the back, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't just the act of giving him a jacket that made her heart swell, it was the reminder of how much kindness could make a difference in someone's life. In that moment, she realized that, in some small way, she was making the world a little brighter for someone else. After Ethan left with his mother, Lucy found herself alone for a moment, standing in the center of the shelter, reflecting on how far she had come. It had been months since her mom's death, and the grief was still a part of her, but it no longer consumed her. It no longer defined her. She had learned that grief could coexist with hope, with purpose, with the ability to help others. And in helping others, she had started to help herself. It was then that Noah called her, just as she was about to leave for the day. His voice was familiar and comforting, and the sound of it made Lucy smile. They had become good friends over the past few months, meeting regularly after support group sessions to talk about their experiences. "Hey, Lucy," Noah said, "how's everything going at the shelter?" "It's been amazing," Lucy replied, her voice filled with a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in a long time. "I've been spending a lot of time there, and it feels good to help. I think I'm starting to figure things out." "I'm really proud of you," Noah said. "You've come a long way." Lucy felt a lump form in her throat, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if she could speak. The kindness and support that Noah had shown her, especially after everything she had been through, meant more to her than words could express. "Thanks, Noah," she said softly. "You've helped me more than you know." After a long pause, Noah spoke again. "I think your mom would be proud of you." "I know I am." Those words hit Lucy like a wave. For so long, she had been carrying the weight of her grief, feeling as though she would never measure up, as though her mother's absence would always be too great a void to fill. But in that moment, with Noah's words hanging in the air, Lucy felt something shift within her. She felt proud of herself, something she hadn't felt in a long time. As she walked home that evening, the sky slowly turning shades of pink and purple as the sun set, Lucy felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, but for the first time, it wasn't too much to bear. She was no longer just carrying her grief, she was carrying the memory of her mother, the love that her mother had instilled in her, and the strength to move forward. And in doing so, Lucy had begun to create a new beginning for herself, one where grief didn't define her, but where love and hope guided her path. As the weeks went on, Lucy found herself more and more immersed in the work at the shelter. Each new day brought a sense of accomplishment, even in the smallest of tasks. She had started to look forward to Saturdays, knowing she'd be able to make a difference, even if it was in a way that seemed so small. Whether it was helping a family find warm coats, organizing food donations, or even just listening to someone who needed to talk, Lucy felt that she was contributing to something bigger than herself. And that felt good. Yet, there were still moments when the grief would catch her off guard, when she would be hit with a wave of loneliness, of sadness that she couldn't shake. It wasn't as overwhelming as it had been in the early days after her mother's death, but it was still there, lingering in the background, reminding her that healing wasn't a destination, but a journey. One such moment came on a Saturday afternoon, a month after Lucy had started volunteering at the shelter. She had been helping organize a community meal event, one of the biggest the shelter had held in years. Volunteers were busy setting up tables, preparing food, and arranging decorations to make the space feel as welcoming as possible. Lucy was in charge of greeting families as they arrived, handing them meal tickets and showing them to their seats. The room was filled with the soft hum of conversation, the clinking of silverware, and the laughter of children running around. It was a beautiful sight, a glimpse of normalcy in a world that often felt chaotic. Yet, as Lucy watched a mother and her young daughter walk into the room, the mother holding the girl's hand with a quiet strength, it hit her, the ache in her chest, the painful realization that she would never again walk into a room like this with her mom. Her mother had always been the person who taught her how to help others, how to be kind even when life wasn't easy. Lucy could still picture her mom in her mind, smiling gently at her, reassuring her that it was always worth it to do good in the world, no matter how small the act. The thought of never seeing her mom again was still something Lucy struggled to accept, even now, so many months later. She stepped outside for a moment, needing a break from the overwhelming emotions that threatened to rise up. The cool air felt good against her skin, the quietness of the street offering her a sense of solitude. Lucy took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, to steady the racing thoughts in her mind. In that moment of stillness, something shifted inside her, a sudden realization, a moment of clarity. She didn't need to forget her mom in order to move forward. In fact, the more she tried to shut out her mother's memory, the more it hurt. It wasn't about leaving the past behind, it was about learning to carry it with her. Her mother's love, her mother's lessons, her mother's strength, it was all still a part of her. It always would be. Lucy smiled softly to herself, a sense of peace settling over her. She didn't need to let go of her grief, she just needed to let it become a part of her journey, a reminder of the love that had shaped her into the person she was becoming. Her mother was gone, but she wasn't truly gone. She would always be a part of Lucy, through her actions, through her kindness, and through the way she chose to move forward with hope in her heart. With that newfound clarity, Lucy re-entered the shelter with a renewed sense of purpose. She was no longer fighting against her grief, instead, she was embracing it. It was a part of her story, a part of her strength. And, in a way, it was a part of the love she was now sharing with others. Later that evening, as the event wound down and families began to leave, Lucy found herself sitting in a quiet corner, exhausted but content. The evening had been a success, the shelter had served over 100 meals to families in need, and the volunteers had worked together to make the space feel like home for everyone who walked through the door. But more than that, Lucy realized that she had given something more than just her time. She had given her heart. Noah had been at the event too, helping serve meals and talking with the families. As they stood by the door, saying their goodbyes to the last of the guests, he walked over to her, offering her a bottle of water. "You did great today," he said, his voice warm with pride. "This whole event was amazing." Lucy took the water from him, smiling. "Thanks. It feels good to be a part of something that matters." Noah nodded, glancing around at the cleanup crew starting to finish up. "You know, I think your mom would be really proud of what you've done here. I know I am. Lucy's heart skipped a beat. She had heard those words before, but this time, they meant something different. They weren't just a kind gesture, they were the truth. Her mother had always believed in the importance of community, of helping those who couldn't always help themselves. And now, Lucy was living that belief. She was walking in her mother's footsteps, but making the path her own. For the first time in months, Lucy felt like she had truly found her place in the world. She was no longer just a grieving daughter, lost in the wake of her mother's passing. She was someone who could help, someone who could make a difference, someone who could carry her mother's legacy forward. And in doing so, she had begun to heal in ways she hadn't expected. As she and Noah walked outside together, the sun had already set, and the stars were starting to twinkle in the clear night sky. It was a peaceful evening, the quiet hum of the city offering a sense of comfort. You know, Noah said, breaking the silence, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about moving forward and still holding on to the past. I think it's one of the hardest things to figure out. But maybe it's not about letting go of the past. Maybe it's about learning to live with it, to keep it with you in a way that doesn't weigh you down. Lucy nodded, feeling the weight of his words. I think you're right. It's not about forgetting the past. It's about finding a way to keep it with you, without letting it stop you from moving forward. They stood there for a moment, the cool night air swirling around them, both understanding that they were in the midst of something bigger than either of them fully realized. As autumn deepened and the leaves began to turn shades of red and gold, Lucy continued to settle into her new life. The routine of volunteering at the shelter had become a comforting part of her week, and with each passing day, she felt herself growing stronger. It wasn't that she had completely healed, it wasn't that simple, but she was learning how to navigate the complex emotions of grief and hope. She was no longer lost in the pain, she had learned how to live with it, to carry it with her as she moved forward. One chilly November afternoon, Lucy walked into the shelter for her weekly shift. The crisp fall air nipped at her skin, and she pulled her jacket tighter around herself as she entered the warm building. The shelter was buzzing with activity, volunteers preparing for an upcoming winter coat drive, families picking up donations, and the staff organizing everything for the months ahead. Lucy found herself drawn to the back room, where boxes of donations were stacked high. She had been assigned to sort through some old clothes to make sure they were still in good condition for the coat drive. As she worked, the rhythmic motion of folding clothes and sorting through boxes offered a quiet space for her thoughts. For a moment, she allowed herself to drift away from the world around her, reflecting on how far she had come since that first day of volunteering. It wasn't just the tasks she was doing that had changed her, it was the way she had grown emotionally. She was no longer consumed by her grief. Instead, she had begun to find ways to channel it into something positive, something meaningful. Her connection to her mom's memory had evolved. Lucy no longer saw it as something that pulled her back, holding her in the past. Now, it was a source of strength. She realized she had been carrying her mom's love with her all along, it was woven into everything she did, from her volunteer work to the simple, everyday moments where she chose to show kindness to others. As she folded another sweater, Lucy felt a hand tap her on the shoulder. Startled, she looked up to see a familiar face, Noah's, with his easy smile and the usual spark of curiosity in his eyes. "Hey, Lucy," Noah said, leaning against the doorway. "Got a minute?" Lucy returned his smile, setting the sweater aside. "Of course. What's up?" Noah glanced around the room, as if making sure they had a moment of privacy. "I just wanted to check in with you. I know you've been doing a lot here at the shelter, and I wanted to say, I'm really proud of you. You've come a long way." Lucy's heart warmed at his words. She had heard this from him before, but each time it felt different. It felt like Noah truly understood what it meant for her to be here, what it meant for her to still be standing after everything that had happened. "Thanks, Noah. That really means a lot to me," Lucy said, her voice soft but steady. "I feel like I'm really starting to find my way." Noah nodded, but there was something else in his eyes, something that made Lucy pause. It was as if there was more he wanted to say, something he wasn't sure how to put into words. Actually, there's something I've been thinking about, Noah said, shifting uncomfortably. I know you've been through a lot. And, well. I guess I've been wondering, what's next for you? Lucy blinked, surprised by the question. What do you mean? I mean, you've been so focused on helping others, which is amazing, but, have you thought about what you need for yourself? I know it's hard, but you don't have to carry all of this on your own. You deserve to find peace, too. You don't have to have it all figured out, but I just want to make sure you're taking care of yourself, too. Lucy was taken aback. It wasn't the first time someone had asked her this. Her friends and family had voiced similar concerns, but there was something about the way Noah asked, the genuine care in his voice, that made her stop and think. For so long, Lucy had thrown herself into her mom's memory, into helping others, into anything that could make the pain more manageable. But Noah was right, she hadn't really stopped to think about her own needs. She had been so focused on finding purpose and meaning through her grief that she hadn't considered what it meant to take care of herself, to find healing that wasn't just about moving forward but also about allowing herself the space to feel. I haven't really thought about that, Lucy admitted, her voice tinged with vulnerability. I guess I've been so focused on doing the right thing, honoring my mom's memory, that I didn't even realize I might be neglecting myself. Noah gave her a soft smile, understanding without judgment. It's okay, Lucy. You don't have to have it all figured out. It's just important to take some time for yourself, too. You've been doing so much for others, but you deserve to heal in your own way, too. Lucy took a deep breath, letting his words sink in. She had been so afraid of the sadness that came with letting herself grieve fully. She had pushed it away, thinking that if she didn't stay busy, if she didn't keep moving forward, she would be swallowed by the grief. But maybe Noah was right. Maybe it was time to take a step back, to allow herself to feel everything that had been building up inside. For the first time in a long while, Lucy allowed herself to acknowledge that she didn't have to be strong all the time. She didn't have to hold it all together. It was okay to feel lost, to feel broken, to feel like she didn't have all the answers. In fact, it was more than okay, it was necessary. It was part of the healing process. Thanks, Noah, Lucy said, her voice quieter now, but filled with gratitude. I think I really needed to hear that. Noah smiled at her warmly. I'm always here for you, Lucy. You don't have to go through this alone. Lucy nodded, feeling a sense of comfort wash over her. For so long, she had been isolated in her grief, feeling as though no one truly understood her pain. But with Noah's words, and with the growing support of the people around her, Lucy realized she didn't have to carry the weight of it all alone. She had a community now. She had people who cared about her, people who were willing to walk alongside her as she continued on this difficult journey. As the afternoon wore on and the shelter began to quiet down, Lucy found herself standing outside again, the evening sky a deep shade of indigo above her. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a sense of peace. It wasn't a grand epiphany, but it was enough. She was learning to let go of the pressure to be perfect, to be strong all the time. She was learning to let herself heal. And for the first time in a long while, Lucy felt hopeful. As winter approached, Lucy's life seemed to have taken on a rhythm. The days at the shelter were filled with busy work, organizing food drives and assisting families in need. Each week, she continued to volunteer, becoming an integral part of the community. The sense of purpose she had found was a comfort, but there were still moments of emptiness, small gaps in her life where she longed for the presence of her mother. Even with the satisfaction of helping others, there were times when the loss was too great, too raw. One evening, as the days grew shorter and the cold crept into the air, Lucy was on her way out of the shelter after a particularly hectic day. She had been working on a new initiative for the upcoming holiday season, a special gift drive for children in need. The work had been fulfilling, but the exhaustion weighed on her. She was looking forward to a quiet night at home, perhaps a cup of hot tea, a good book, and some much-needed rest. But as she walked toward her car, she noticed a familiar figure standing by the entrance of the shelter. At first, she wasn't sure who it was. The figure was hunched slightly, as though waiting for something. But as she drew closer, Lucy's breath caught in her throat. It was her father. He was standing there, as if unsure of whether to approach or to leave. The sight of him hit her in a way she hadn't anticipated. For months, she had kept herself busy, immersing herself in work and in the community. The thought of her father had lingered in the back of her mind, but she had pushed it away. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face him, not after everything that had happened. Yet here he was. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stopped in her tracks. The space between them seemed to stretch for miles, and for a moment, she didn't know what to do. The past few years had been strained between them. After her mother's death, her father had withdrawn, retreating into his own grief. They had drifted apart, not out of anger but from a shared sense of loss that neither of them knew how to bridge. Lucy's hands trembled slightly, and she tried to steady her breath before walking toward him. She wasn't sure what to expect, what words they would exchange. But she knew one thing: this was a moment she couldn't ignore. It had been a long time since they'd spoken, and seeing him now, so lost in the same grief that had consumed her for months, made her realize that they both needed healing. "Dad?" Lucy's voice was tentative, breaking the silence between them. Her father looked up, his face weathered, the lines of age and sorrow more pronounced than she remembered. His eyes were tired but still held a flicker of recognition, as though he wasn't entirely sure what to say, either. "Lucy," he said softly, his voice rough from disuse. He shifted on his feet, as though unsure of how to approach her. I didn't know if you'd be here tonight." "I usually am," Lucy replied, her tone quieter than she intended. There was a part of her that wanted to turn around and walk away, that wanted to retreat back to the safety of her own space. But another part, the part that knew they both needed to face what had been left unsaid, pushed her forward. Her father took a step closer, his eyes searching her face, as though trying to see who she had become in the months since they'd last spoken. "I've been meaning to come by, to see how you're doing. I know we haven't. I know it hasn't been easy." Lucy felt a lump form in her throat. There were so many words she had been holding inside, so many feelings she hadn't known how to express. Her father's absence, his inability to be there for her after her mother's death, had left a mark on her heart. But standing here now, in the quiet evening air, she realized that the pain was not so much about his absence, it was about their mutual silence, the space that had grown between them. "I've been okay," Lucy said, her voice tight. "I've been keeping busy with the shelter. It helps, more than I expected." Her father nodded, his expression softening. "I'm glad to hear that. Your mother would be proud of the work you're doing." Lucy felt a pang at the mention of her mother, but this time it didn't overwhelm her. It reminded her of the lessons her mother had taught her, of the love she had given her. And for the first time in a long while, Lucy felt the warmth of that love, not as a pain, but as a light. "I think I'm finally starting to understand, a little bit," Lucy murmured. What Mom meant when she talked about community, about helping others. It's not just about giving. It's about healing, too. Her father's face crumpled slightly, as if the weight of her words was too much for him to bear. He stepped closer, as though needing to bridge the gap between them. I've been trying to find my way too, Lucy," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I know I haven't been there for you. I couldn't be, after everything that happened. But I should have been." Lucy blinked, surprised by the rawness in his voice. She had never heard him admit his own struggles in such a vulnerable way. Her father, the man who had always tried to hide his emotions, was finally allowing the grief to surface. "I understand, Dad," Lucy said quietly, her heart softening. "I've been angry for a long time. Angry that you weren't there when I needed you. But I also know, we've both been hurting. I guess we didn't know how to help each other." For a moment, there was a silence between them, a quiet understanding. It wasn't the end of their pain, and it certainly wasn't a quick fix. But it was a step forward. It was a moment of recognition that they were both human, both grieving, both trying to find their way in a world that seemed impossibly empty without her mother. Her father reached out tentatively, and Lucy found herself accepting his hand, the touch tentative but full of promise. "Maybe we don't have to do this alone anymore," he said, his voice gentle. Lucy nodded, tears welling in her eyes as she looked at him. "Maybe not." The evening sky stretched above them, the stars beginning to twinkle in the deepening darkness. For the first time in a long while, Lucy felt a sense of reconciliation. The road ahead would still be difficult, but maybe, just maybe, they could walk it together. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days following her meeting with her father were marked by a new kind of quiet, one that was both heavy and hopeful. The conversation had been a beginning, not a resolution. There was still so much left unsaid, so many walls left to tear down, but Lucy had never felt more determined to face them. She had spent so much of her life trying to navigate her grief on her own, but now, for the first time in months, she was beginning to believe that healing could be shared, that it didn't have to be a solitary journey. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of tentative steps. Lucy and her father began meeting for coffee on Sundays, small, unscheduled moments where they could talk about anything and everything, or sometimes nothing at all. They didn't rush into deep conversations about the past or the pain they had both carried for so long. Instead, they allowed the time together to settle, like a blanket of quiet understanding. The simple act of being in the same space, acknowledging each other's presence, was enough for now. But with each passing Sunday, Lucy noticed subtle shifts. Her father would tell small stories about the years she had missed, about things he'd done to cope with the loss of her mother. It was strange to hear him speak of her in this way, as though she were a stranger to him. But Lucy also recognized the effort, the care he was taking to bridge the gap between them. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. One Sunday, a few weeks after their first conversation, Lucy found herself walking into the small coffee shop they had begun to frequent. The familiar smell of fresh coffee beans filled the air, mingling with the sound of light chatter from other patrons. Her father was already there, sitting at their usual table by the window. His face was worn, but there was a lightness to him today, a quiet ease in the way he looked up when she entered. "Morning, Lou," he greeted her with a soft smile, his voice warm. "Morning, Dad," Lucy replied, her smile matching his. There was still a hint of uncertainty in her chest, but it was nothing like before. The gap that had once felt insurmountable now felt smaller, more manageable. Lucy slid into the chair across from him, the sunlight filtering through the window, casting soft rays across the table. As she settled in, she noticed that he had already ordered her usual, a hot chai latte, with a little extra foam. The gesture made her heart flutter with a quiet affection. It was a small thing, but it was the kind of thing that spoke volumes. He had been paying attention, remembering her preferences, trying to make her feel at home. "I've been thinking," her father said, stirring his coffee slowly. "About how much you've changed. I mean, I know you've been through so much, and I'm proud of how strong you've been. But I also know it hasn't been easy." Lucy nodded, her fingers tapping lightly on her cup. "It's still not easy, Dad. But I'm getting there." Her father paused, his eyes flickering with something deeper, something that she couldn't quite place. "I don't think I've ever told you this, but, after your mom passed, I didn't know how to be a father to you. I didn't know how to help you heal because I couldn't even heal myself. I was so lost in my own grief that I didn't see how much you were hurting." Lucy swallowed hard, her heart heavy with his admission. She had known that her father had withdrawn after her mother's death. But hearing him speak those words, hearing the regret in his voice, hit her in a way she wasn't prepared for. "I know, Dad," she said quietly. "I know you were hurting too. I guess I was just so angry that I didn't let myself see it. I thought you should have been there for me when I needed you the most." Her father's eyes softened, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "I should have been. I should have done better. I'm sorry for not being the father you needed." The words hung in the air for a moment, and Lucy felt the weight of them settle into her heart. For so long, she had carried a silent grudge against her father, convinced that he had failed her when she needed him most. But hearing him speak from his own place of pain, understanding how deeply he had been affected by her mother's death, made something inside her shift. "I've carried that anger for a long time," Lucy admitted, her voice shaky. "But I don't want to anymore. I don't want to keep holding on to it. I think I've been so focused on the hurt, that I never really saw you. I never saw how much you were hurting too." Her father's eyes filled with emotion, and for a long moment, they simply sat there, both lost in their own thoughts. Then, he reached across the table, his hand gently resting over hers. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. "I don't know what the future holds for us, Lucy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want to try. I want to be here for you, the way I should have been all along." Lucy felt a lump form in her throat, but she didn't push it away. This was what healing felt like, messy, complicated, but real. She wasn't sure what their relationship would look like going forward, but for the first time, she felt hopeful. For the first time, she felt that perhaps forgiveness could heal not only their past but also their future. "I want that too, Dad," Lucy whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how to fix everything, but I think we can try." Her father nodded, his face softening as he squeezed her hand. "We'll take it one step at a time." And so, in the quiet comfort of their shared space, Lucy realized that healing wasn't about fixing everything all at once. It wasn't about erasing the past or pretending the hurt didn't exist. It was about taking it one step at a time, together. It was about choosing to show up for each other, even when the way forward wasn't clear. As they sat there, sipping their coffee, Lucy felt something inside her shift. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she believed that it could be brighter, because she wasn't walking through it alone anymore. The days that followed Lucy and her father's breakthrough felt like a slow but steady breath. The weight that had once hung between them, thick and unyielding, began to lighten, even if just a little. It wasn't that the pain of the past had disappeared, it never would, but there was a new sense of possibility. Something small, but significant, had shifted. Lucy had allowed herself to stop holding on to anger and start opening up to the idea of healing. And her father, in turn, was trying in ways that left her with a sense of cautious optimism. But healing was never linear. The days were filled with highs and lows, each moment a small victory, each misstep a gentle reminder that there was no perfect way forward. Lucy found herself thinking more and more about the work she had been doing at the shelter. Helping others had given her a sense of purpose, but lately, she'd felt a quiet yearning to do more, to stretch beyond the walls of the shelter and truly make a difference. She knew that her community needed more than just resources, it needed connection. The people who came through the doors of the shelter weren't just looking for food, clothes, or shelter. They were looking for a sense of belonging, a glimmer of hope in a world that often felt cold and unforgiving. One morning, as she sat in the small office at the shelter, reviewing the donation drive for the holidays, an email popped up on her screen. It was from a local nonprofit she had heard of but hadn't yet engaged with. They were a mentoring organization, focused on pairing volunteers with young people in need of guidance, especially those who had lost parents or faced other significant challenges in their lives. The email invited her to attend a meeting about their upcoming initiatives, hoping to bring in new mentors who could connect with the young people in their program. Something about the invitation felt right. She had been waiting for a sign, something that would tell her where she was meant to go next, and here it was. Lucy's heart raced a little. She knew this was the next step she had been searching for. Not just volunteering at the shelter, but becoming a mentor, someone who could give hope and support to a younger generation, just as she had needed when she was younger. She could be that steady presence for someone else. And, in a way, it felt like a way to continue her mother's legacy of love, compassion, and care. The following evening, Lucy arrived at the community center where the meeting was being held. She felt a flutter of nervousness in her chest, but also an excitement she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. As she entered the small room, she was greeted by a handful of people, some older, some younger, all with a common goal in mind. To offer guidance, to be a beacon for those who needed it most. The meeting began with introductions and a brief overview of the organization's work. Lucy listened intently, feeling a deep sense of connection to the mission. But it wasn't until the program coordinator, a woman named Sarah, began sharing stories of the young people they helped that Lucy's heart truly opened. "One of our goals," Sarah said, "is to provide these kids with someone who truly listens. Not just a mentor in the traditional sense, but someone who is there for them, someone who can understand their struggles. Many of them have been through things you wouldn't wish on anyone, a loss of a parent, a loss of a sense of stability. They're looking for guidance, but they're also looking for compassion." Sarah's words echoed in Lucy's mind. She had been one of those kids once. She knew the pain of loss all too well, the feeling of being adrift, trying to find a way to navigate a world that felt too big and too unforgiving. "Anyone here think they might be interested in joining us as mentors?" Sarah asked at the end of her presentation. Lucy raised her hand without hesitation, her heart beating a little faster. She knew, without a doubt, that this was where she was meant to be. The following weeks were a whirlwind of new beginnings. Lucy went through the training process with the mentoring program, learning techniques for listening, supporting, and guiding a young person. It wasn't easy. There were moments when she wasn't sure if she was doing enough, or if she could truly make a difference in the life of someone who had suffered so much. But there were also moments of joy, small victories that reminded her why she was doing this in the first place. The first young person Lucy was paired with was a 14-year-old girl named Mia. Mia had lost her father to a car accident when she was younger, and her mother had struggled to provide for her and her younger brother ever since. Mia's story resonated deeply with Lucy, who saw a reflection of herself in the girl's pain. Mia had built walls around her heart, not trusting easily, and Lucy understood that more than anyone. But as they met every week, talking about school, life, and dreams for the future, Lucy began to see a shift in Mia. Slowly, Mia started to open up, sharing more about her life, her fears, and the struggles she faced. During one of their sessions, Mia spoke quietly, as if testing the waters. "Lucy, do you think things ever get better? Like, for real? I mean, I've been told that time heals, but sometimes I don't know if I believe it." Lucy paused, considering the weight of the question. It was a question she had asked herself countless times. Would things ever truly get better? "Mia," she said softly, "I don't know if the pain ever really goes away. But I do believe that it gets easier. It gets easier when you find people who care about you, who understand what you're going through. And it gets easier when you start to forgive yourself and others." Mia looked down at her hands, her fingers nervously twisting together. "I don't know how to forgive," she admitted. "I don't know how to let go of all the hurt." Lucy smiled gently, remembering her own journey with forgiveness. "It's not something that happens overnight. But it's like planting a seed. You take it one step at a time. And the more you care for it, the more it grows. That's how healing works." Mia looked up at her, eyes filled with uncertainty but also a flicker of hope. "I want to believe that," she whispered. Lucy nodded. "I know it's hard. But I'm here for you, Mia. I'm not going anywhere." And in that moment, Lucy felt a sense of purpose like never before. It wasn't just about helping at the shelter anymore, or about her own journey of healing. She was part of something bigger, something that would ripple out into the world in ways she couldn't yet understand. In guiding Mia, she was helping to heal herself, too. The weeks passed with a quiet rhythm. Lucy's bond with Mia deepened, and with each meeting, Mia became more open, more willing to trust. The transformation was slow but beautiful. Lucy had become more than just a mentor, she had become a steady presence in Mia's life, someone she could rely on, someone who would listen without judgment. One chilly Thursday evening, as Lucy sat in the small coffee shop she frequented, sipping on a steaming chai latte, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from Mia. "Mia, I don't know if I can do it. I feel like everything is falling apart." Lucy's heart sank. She quickly typed a reply. "Lucy, I'm here for you, Mia. What's going on?" The response came almost immediately. "Mia, I don't want to talk about it. But I feel like I'm losing control." Lucy stared at the message for a long moment, her mind racing. She knew that Mia's situation had been difficult. She had been juggling school, the grief of losing her father, and the responsibility of helping her mother with her younger brother. But this felt different. It felt like Mia was at a breaking point. Lucy wasn't sure what had triggered this shift, but she knew one thing: Mia needed her now more than ever. Lucy took a deep breath, then tapped out a quick message. "Lucy, I'm not going anywhere. Let's talk. Whenever you're ready." She set the phone down and let out a quiet sigh. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't even have a plan for what to do next. But what she did know was that Mia needed someone who could sit with her in the dark, someone who could hold space for her pain without trying to fix it. Lucy had learned that the hard way: healing wasn't about fixing everything. Sometimes, it was just about being there. The following day, Mia showed up at the shelter, her face pale, her eyes shadowed with worry. Lucy could see that Mia had been holding everything in, trying to stay strong, but it was all starting to unravel. "Mia," Lucy greeted her softly. "You okay?" Mia didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over to one of the couches and sank into it, hugging her knees to her chest. Lucy sat beside her, not speaking, just waiting. Sometimes silence said more than words ever could. "I don't know what to do anymore," Mia said, her voice shaky. "I've been trying to take care of everything, my mom, my brother, school. But it's like I'm falling behind. I can't keep up. And I feel like I'm just breaking inside." Lucy's heart ached for her. She had seen that kind of desperation in her own reflection when she was Mia's age. The feeling of drowning, of being crushed by the weight of responsibility, the pressure to be strong when all you wanted was someone to tell you that it was okay to fall apart. "Mia," Lucy began, her voice gentle, "I know it feels like everything is crumbling, but you don't have to carry it all on your own. You don't have to do everything perfectly. It's okay to ask for help. And it's okay to not have it all figured out." Mia shook her head, her shoulders trembling with emotion. "But what if I let everyone down? My mom, she's been trying so hard, and I don't know if I can keep being the person she needs me to be." Lucy paused, her heart heavy. She had heard Mia's unspoken fear before, the fear of not being enough, of disappointing the people she loved. It was something Lucy herself had carried for years. "Mia," she said softly, her eyes meeting Mia's, "you don't have to be perfect. And you don't have to be everything for your mom. You're allowed to be a kid. You're allowed to feel lost sometimes. You don't have to have it all together." Mia's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. "I don't know how to let go of all this pressure." Lucy took a deep breath, gathering the words that had taken her so long to learn herself. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is be vulnerable. It feels terrifying, but letting yourself feel the weight of everything, admitting that you're struggling, that's how you start healing. That's how you give yourself the permission to not have all the answers. Mia looked at her, a mixture of confusion and hope in her eyes. Vulnerable? Lucy nodded. Yeah. Letting yourself be seen, really seen. Not as someone who has it all figured out, but as someone who is human, someone who needs help, just like anyone else. It's okay to cry, to not know what to do next. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong in a way that most people don't understand. Mia looked down, the words sinking in. Slowly, she nodded, as if processing the truth of what Lucy had said. I don't know if I can do that, she whispered. But I want to try. Lucy smiled, her heart swelling with pride. That's all I can ask for. And I'll be here every step of the way, okay? Mia met her gaze, the first real spark of trust flickering in her eyes. Okay. For the next few weeks, Mia began to open up more, allowing herself to be vulnerable in a way she hadn't before. It wasn't easy for her, and there were still days when the pressure felt too much to bear. But little by little, she started to understand that healing didn't mean always being strong. It meant allowing herself to feel everything, the pain, the fear, and the uncertainty, and finding a way to move through it, one step at a time. In the midst of Mia's healing, Lucy realized something. She had been giving so much of herself to others, her father, Mia, the people at the shelter, but she hadn't allowed herself the same grace. She had been so focused on helping everyone else that she hadn't taken the time to be vulnerable herself. And so, one quiet evening, as Lucy sat alone in her apartment, she let herself cry. Not for anyone else, not for anyone's healing but her own. She allowed herself to feel all the sadness, the fear, the anger that had been buried for so long. And in that moment, she realized that vulnerability was the key to her own healing too. It wasn't about fixing everything, it was about being real, being honest with herself and with those she loved. Lucy had always thought of herself as someone who had come to terms with her past. She had faced the loss of her mother, dealt with the complicated relationship with her father, and found purpose in helping others. Yet, deep down, she knew that some things could never truly be erased, some scars too deep to fade. The reality of that truth came crashing down one night as she sat at the kitchen table, papers scattered around her, trying to organize a fundraiser for the shelter. She'd been putting in long hours, juggling work, her mentoring with Mia, and the demands of the shelter. Everything had been going well, but something inside of her was beginning to unravel. She'd received a letter that day, an official-looking envelope, sealed in gold, bearing the return address of a lawyer's office. At first, she'd brushed it off, thinking it was just some kind of error or misunderstanding. But as the hours passed and the letter remained unopened, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling in her gut. Finally, she broke the seal, her hands trembling slightly as she unfolded the letter. It was from the law firm handling her mother's estate. The letter contained a simple sentence, but the words were like a punch to the stomach. We regret to inform you that due to unresolved legal matters, we are unable to proceed with the distribution of your late mother's estate. Lucy's heart stopped. She hadn't even realized there was an estate to deal with. She'd assumed everything had been taken care of years ago. But the more she read, the more the weight of the letter sank in. Her mother had apparently left behind more than just memories. There were legal matters, debts, and property that needed attention, and now, it seemed, it was Lucy's responsibility to sort it all out. A heavy silence filled the room as Lucy let the reality of the situation sink in. Her mother's passing had left so many unresolved issues, emotional, financial, and now legal. And she had spent so many years focused on moving forward, on building her life, that she had never allowed herself to truly grieve or face the practical side of her mother's death. She thought of her father. Her relationship with him had improved over the last few months, but there were still many unsaid things between them. He had been largely absent during her childhood, too consumed with his own pain to be present for her. And now, even as they had started to rebuild their relationship, it seemed like the past was dragging her back in ways she couldn't control. Her phone buzzed on the table, and Lucy snapped out of her thoughts. It was Mia. Mia, can we talk? I've been thinking about what you said last time. Lucy took a deep breath. Mia's message was a small relief, a distraction from the weight of the letter. She quickly typed a response. Lucy, of course, I'm here. She set the letter aside and dialed Mia's number. After a few rings, Mia picked up, her voice soft but clear. Hey, Lucy, Mia greeted. I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day. About letting go of the pressure, about being vulnerable. Lucy smiled faintly, trying to keep her voice light. I'm glad it's been helping. It's not easy, but you're doing great. Mia was quiet for a moment before speaking again, her words slow and hesitant. I don't know if I've really been honest with myself, though. I've been holding on to a lot of stuff that I didn't want to admit. I've been pretending that everything's fine, but it's not. I don't even know who I am anymore. Lucy's heart softened, and she leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of her own thoughts pulling her deeper. I get it, Mia, she said softly. I really do. Sometimes it feels like everything is just too much, like we're trying to carry too many things. But the truth is, we don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to pretend to be okay if you're not. You're allowed to feel lost. Mia sniffled, and Lucy could hear the quiet sobs in her voice. I'm scared, Lucy. I'm scared that I won't ever be okay, that I won't be able to handle everything. I don't know how to move forward. Lucy closed her eyes, wishing she could reach through the phone and pull Mia into a hug. She understood that fear, the paralyzing fear of being consumed by everything that had happened in the past, the uncertainty about the future, and the weight of expectations. It was a fear that had lived inside her for years, a constant companion. Mia, Lucy said, her voice steady and comforting, it's okay to not know what comes next. Healing is a journey, and it's different for everyone. But I promise you, you don't have to do it alone. You have me. And I'm going to be here for you. You're not lost, you're just figuring things out. And that's okay. Mia's voice was quieter now, as if her tears had started to subside. Thank you, Lucy. I don't know what I'd do without you. I'm right here, Lucy reassured her. We'll figure this out together. After they hung up, Lucy sat quietly, reflecting on the conversation. She realized that, just like Mia, she hadn't truly been honest with herself about the weight she was carrying. She had buried her feelings about her mother's death, about the unresolved issues with her father, about the scars that still lingered inside her. She had tried so hard to help others, to be the strong, dependable one. But now, with everything that was unfolding, both for Mia and herself, Lucy realized that it was okay to feel overwhelmed, to admit that she didn't have all the answers. She was still healing. She was still learning how to be vulnerable. And for the first time in a long while, Lucy allowed herself to sit with that feeling. She allowed herself to grieve for the things she had lost, her mother, her childhood, the pieces of herself that had been left behind in the process of trying to move forward. In that moment, she made a decision. She wouldn't ignore the past anymore. She would face it, piece by piece, and allow herself to heal in her own time. The burden of the past didn't have to define her. But it was part of her story, and it needed to be acknowledged before she could move forward with peace. The days following her discovery of her mother's unresolved legal matters felt like a blur for Lucy. She had set aside time to address the paperwork and the phone calls with lawyers, but in the back of her mind, the looming feeling of unfinished business with her mother and father continued to haunt her. Lucy had spent years burying the emotional debris left in the wake of her mother's passing. She had been too focused on surviving, on building a life from the ashes of her childhood, to truly confront the complexity of her grief and resentment. Yet, now, the past was beginning to surface, like an insistent shadow, refusing to be ignored any longer. It was a rainy Friday afternoon when Lucy found herself sitting across from her father in a small diner, the same diner they had visited on rare occasions when she was younger. It was always an awkward place, one of those spots that held memories both good and painful, a place where every corner seemed to whisper remnants of conversations they'd had long ago. The smell of coffee filled the air, and the clink of silverware on plates echoed in the background, but there was an undeniable tension between them. Her father, Robert, was still the same, stoic, reserved, and burdened by the weight of a life that he had never fully shared with her. Their relationship had always been fragile, built on the remnants of broken promises and unsaid words. But over the past few months, Lucy had made an effort to reach out, to try and rebuild something, anything, that resembled the relationship they should have had all those years. She didn't know if it was for his sake, her sake, or her mother's, but it felt necessary. Still, even now, there was a barrier between them. A distance that had been there for so long that it seemed impossible to bridge. "Lucy," Robert began, his voice rough, "I got your letter. About your mother's estate." Lucy looked up from her coffee cup, meeting his eyes for the first time. Her father's gaze was clouded with a mix of regret and something else, something deeper, maybe even more painful. But she had always found it difficult to read him. "I didn't know there were any issues," Robert continued, his words clipped, almost like he was trying to distance himself from the situation. "I thought everything was settled. I thought your mother had taken care of it before." Lucy sighed, her hand trembling slightly as she set down her cup. "I didn't know either, Dad. But now it's in my hands. I'm having to deal with all the things she left behind, things we never talked about." A silence hung between them, thick and uncomfortable. She could feel the walls going up, one brick at a time. The same walls that had separated them for years, the same walls that kept them from truly connecting. But this time, Lucy wasn't going to let them stay up. She couldn't. "Why didn't you ever tell me about any of this?" Lucy asked quietly, the question slipping out before she could stop herself. "Why did you let me handle everything alone after she died? Why did you let me believe I had to figure it all out?" Robert looked down, his eyes darkening. "I didn't know how to be there for you," he admitted, his voice rough. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I kept my distance, it would keep you safe. But I see now. I see how wrong that was." Lucy felt the rawness in his words, the pain he had been carrying for so long. For years, she had believed her father didn't care, that he had chosen to be absent in her life. But in this moment, something shifted. She realized that her father hadn't been indifferent, he had been lost in his own grief, unsure of how to be a father, unsure of how to give her what she needed. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his hand. "I understand, Dad. I was angry for a long time. I thought you didn't care, that you left me alone to figure everything out. But I see now that you were struggling too. You weren't the father I wanted, but maybe you were the father you could be. And I don't want to hold on to that anger anymore." Robert blinked, his expression faltering as his eyes filled with emotion. For a moment, he looked vulnerable, like a man who had been carrying an unbearable weight for far too long. "I don't know if I deserve your forgiveness," he whispered. "You do," Lucy said firmly. "You're my dad. And I'm learning to forgive, even when it's hard. Even when I don't know how to let go of the pain. I'm learning to forgive both of us." The words hung in the air, almost too heavy to breathe in. But there was a shift that Lucy felt deep in her chest, like a crack in the armor she had built around herself for so many years. She had been holding on to the hurt, the resentment, the anger, as if it was the only thing keeping her anchored to the past. But the truth was, it had been holding her prisoner. And now, for the first time, she was letting it go. "I'm sorry for the years we lost," Robert said, his voice strained, his hand trembling under hers. "I should have been there for you. I should have done more. I know, Dad. I know. But we can't change the past. All we can do is try to make up for it now." And in that moment, Lucy realized something that had eluded her for so long: forgiveness wasn't just about absolving someone else, it was about setting herself free. It wasn't about forgetting the past or pretending it didn't hurt, it was about choosing to no longer let the pain control her. It was about reclaiming her future, free from the shackles of resentment. The rest of their conversation was quiet, simple. They spoke of old memories, of regrets, of things left unsaid. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, and it wouldn't erase the years of absence and pain. But it was a beginning. It was the first step toward healing, both for her and for her father. When they parted ways, Lucy felt a sense of relief that she hadn't known in years. For the first time, the weight of the past felt lighter. The anger that had once consumed her, the resentment that had been festering in her heart for so long, began to fade into the background, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. Lucy stood outside the lawyer's office, the rain falling softly around her, her thoughts swirling. The letter she had received regarding her mother's estate had led her here, to this cold, sterile building. It was a far cry from the warm, familiar places she had once known as a child. The lawyer had given her a series of forms to sign, files to review, and a detailed inventory of her mother's property and debts. There was so much more to her mother's life than Lucy had ever realized. For years, Lucy had compartmentalized her mother's death. She had focused on the things she could control, the shelter, the work she was doing to help others, the small victories she had achieved in her personal life. But standing here now, dealing with the reality of her mother's legacy, she was overwhelmed with the weight of everything that had been left behind. As she entered the office, a sharp, professional woman greeted her at the reception desk. "Ms. Harris, we've been expecting you. The documents are ready for review." Lucy followed her to a small conference room where a stack of papers awaited her. She sat down across from the lawyer, feeling the weight of the responsibility settling in her chest. This wasn't just about paperwork. This was about untangling a life that was never fully understood, about understanding who her mother was beyond the woman Lucy had known. And as she looked at the piles of legal documents, she realized that she had no idea where to start. Her mother had left a series of instructions, mostly about the house in the suburbs, which was to be sold, and the few investments that would need to be sorted out. But there were also personal items, letters, diaries, and keepsakes that Lucy would have to sort through. She had never expected to inherit so much, especially not when she had barely known her mother's deepest thoughts, let alone the things that had truly mattered to her. "Are you okay?" the lawyer asked, noticing the strained expression on Lucy's face. Lucy sighed, running her fingers through her hair. I wasn't prepared for this. I didn't realize there would be so much. I don't know if I can do this." The lawyer nodded sympathetically. "It's a lot to process. But you're not alone. We're here to help you navigate through this. It's not just about handling the assets. It's about making sense of the legacy your mother left behind, even if it's hard." Lucy nodded but couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to confront something far deeper than paperwork. Every step she took in this process would bring her closer to knowing a side of her mother she had never understood. And that scared her. She left the office that afternoon feeling both exhausted and unsettled. The weight of her mother's life, and now her death, pressed against her chest as she tried to make sense of the emotional and practical tasks ahead. Later that evening, Lucy found herself at the shelter, seeking solace in the familiar faces of those she was trying to help. Mia was there too, as she had become a regular volunteer, helping out with the children and organizing activities. It was a sense of community that Lucy had come to rely on, people who understood her need for connection, even in the chaos of her life. Mia greeted her with a bright smile as she entered. "Hey, Lucy. How's everything going? You look overwhelmed." Lucy smiled faintly. "Yeah, you could say that. I'm starting to realize there's more to my mother's life than I ever thought. I've been dealing with the legal stuff today, and it's a lot. More than I was ready for." Mia raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing the weight of Lucy's words. "That sounds heavy. Do you need to talk about it?" Lucy hesitated, but the warmth of Mia's concern made it impossible to resist. I just don't know where to start. I've been avoiding the personal stuff, her journals, letters, things she left behind. I don't think I'm ready to face it, but I don't really have a choice, do I? Mia placed a hand on Lucy's shoulder, offering silent comfort. I get it. It's hard. But you don't have to do it alone. And I'm sure you'll find more strength than you realize. I know it doesn't feel like it now, but this could be a way for you to finally understand her, to find some peace in what she left behind. Lucy nodded, grateful for Mia's words, even though they didn't take away the sense of dread gnawing at her. I just wish I had more time. I wish I had been able to ask her the things I never did. It's like, everything feels unfinished. Mia's eyes softened with understanding. I think that's part of healing, right? Learning to finish things on your own, even when it feels like you've missed your chance. You're already taking the first step by looking at all of this, even if it's hard. Lucy swallowed, trying to push down the lump in her throat. Mia was right. It wasn't about getting all the answers. It was about accepting that there would always be questions left unanswered, and learning to live with that uncertainty. That evening, after the shelter had quieted down and the volunteers began to leave, Lucy stayed behind for a few moments. She took a deep breath and made her way to the small room where they stored donated items, and to her surprise, she found herself staring at a box of old letters and trinkets from her mother. There, tucked in the corner, was a small, leather-bound journal. Her heart raced as she reached for it. Her mother's handwriting on the cover sent a shiver down her spine. She had never seen this before, never known it existed. As Lucy opened the journal to the first page, she felt an overwhelming sense of connection, like she was about to unlock a part of her mother's soul that had been hidden away for years. And as she began reading the first entry, the words blurred in front of her eyes. It was more than just a letter. It was a confession. A revelation. Her mother had written about the pain of their fractured family, about the choices she had made and the regrets that had shaped her life. For the first time, Lucy saw her mother as a person, not just a distant figure in her past. With each word she read, Lucy felt a little more at peace, as though the pieces of the puzzle were finally beginning to fall into place. She wasn't sure what she would find as she read further, but in that moment, she realized that confronting the past wasn't about erasing the hurt, it was about understanding it. The days following Lucy's discovery of her mother's journal felt like a mix of relief and trepidation. The words in the journal had given her an unexpected window into the woman who had raised her. But with each page she turned, more questions arose. Lucy couldn't help but wonder if she'd ever truly known her mother, or if the woman she'd grown up with was just one version of a much more complex person. Sitting in her small apartment, Lucy reread the first entry of the journal for the third time. The words still felt heavy, as if they were meant for someone else, not her. It was strange, she'd always thought she knew the basics of her mother's life, the surface details that most people saw. But this was different. This was her mother's raw, unfiltered voice, and it made Lucy feel as though she had only scratched the surface of a much deeper emotional landscape. In the journal, her mother spoke candidly about the choices she'd made, the heartache she'd endured, and the unspoken truths about their family life. Lucy had never imagined her mother as someone capable of regret, but the journal painted a different picture, one of a woman who had felt trapped by circumstances, unsure of how to navigate the difficult relationship with her husband, and uncertain about how to raise a child in the midst of it all. As Lucy continued reading, one particular passage stopped her in her tracks. I never wanted Lucy to see me as weak. I wanted to be strong for her, to be the mother she needed. But there are moments when I feel so lost, so alone. I wonder if I've failed her. I wonder if she will ever understand why I made the decisions I did. I hope that one day she will forgive me for the things I could not give her. Lucy's heart clenched. Her mother had always seemed so strong, so capable. It had never crossed her mind that her mother might have felt lost or uncertain. The thought that her mother had struggled with feelings of failure was almost impossible to comprehend. How could a woman who had always appeared so composed have harbored such deep insecurities? Lucy felt a pang of guilt. She had never given her mother the benefit of the doubt. She had assumed, like many children do, that her parents had everything figured out. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. It was Mia, who had been her emotional anchor through this entire process. Lucy opened the door, and Mia stepped inside with a warm smile. "Hey, you okay?" Mia asked, her voice laced with concern. Lucy nodded slowly, though the weight of the journal's contents still hung heavily on her mind. "I don't know, Mia. I found something. Something that, it's just a lot to process." Mia sat down next to her, sensing the heaviness in Lucy's voice. "What is it? What did you find?" Lucy hesitated for a moment before handing her the journal. "This is my mom's. I didn't even know it existed. She wrote about a lot of things. About me. About her regrets." Mia opened the journal, her eyes scanning the pages. "Wow. This is so personal. But I can see why it's hitting you hard." "I just didn't know," Lucy said, her voice breaking. "I never knew she felt this way. I always thought she had it all together, that she was strong enough to handle everything. But this. It makes me wonder if I ever really knew her at all." Mia gently placed the journal down, her hand resting on Lucy's. "Maybe you didn't know her in the way you thought you did. But I don't think that means you didn't know her at all. You were a child. It's hard for kids to understand the complexities of their parents. It's only now, looking at this, that you're seeing her as a person, just like you. And that's okay." Lucy stared at the journal, feeling both a sense of connection and a wave of sadness. "I wish she had told me this. I wish she had talked to me about it. Maybe it would have helped me understand her better." "Maybe," Mia agreed, her voice soft. "But sometimes people keep their struggles inside, thinking they're protecting us. Maybe your mom didn't think you needed to know this burden. She wanted to shield you from her own pain." Lucy exhaled slowly. "I always thought that because I didn't know everything about her, it meant I was missing something. That I wasn't close enough to her. But now, I think maybe there was just a lot of things she couldn't share with me. Maybe she wanted me to have a different kind of childhood, one that wasn't clouded by her own struggles." Mia smiled gently, giving her friend's hand a reassuring squeeze. "I think you're right. And that doesn't make you any less loved or any less important to her. Sometimes the people we love hide things because they don't want us to see them suffer. But it doesn't mean they don't care. It means they care so much that they're willing to carry the pain on their own." Lucy's throat tightened as the tears she had been holding back finally started to spill. "I never gave her enough credit. I was so caught up in my own resentment, in my own anger, that I couldn't see how much she was really struggling." Mia wrapped an arm around her, pulling her into a comforting embrace. "It's not your fault, Lucy. You were a kid. You didn't have the tools to understand what she was going through. But now, you're learning, and that's all anyone can do. We're all just doing our best." Lucy nodded, wiping her tears. "I want to learn more about her, who she really was. I want to understand her choices, her mistakes, the things that made her the person she was. And I think that's going to help me understand myself better, too." Mia smiled softly, her voice steady and kind. "That's the first step to healing, Lucy. You're not just learning about your mom. You're learning about your own heart. And that's powerful." The next few days were filled with difficult revelations. Lucy continued to read her mother's journal, uncovering details that she had never known before, hidden struggles, quiet victories, and the silent burdens her mother had carried for years. The deeper she delved into the journal, the more she realized how much of her mother's life had been shaped by guilt, fear, and the weight of responsibility. There were no easy answers, no sudden moments of clarity. But each page helped Lucy understand her mother in a way she had never been able to before. It wasn't about idolizing her mother or turning a blind eye to her flaws. It was about accepting her as a flawed, real person, someone who had tried her best, even when it didn't always seem like it. And as Lucy processed the journal's contents, she felt a strange sense of closure begin to form, not just for her mother, but for herself. She wasn't just trying to piece together the remnants of a lost relationship, she was learning to forgive, to accept, and to move forward. The past could never be fully rewritten, but it didn't have to define her future. The more Lucy read, the more she realized that the journal wasn't just a collection of memories, it was a map of her mother's emotional terrain. Each entry revealed a piece of the puzzle she had never understood. But now, each word made sense. She began to see how her mother's fears, regrets, and hopes had shaped her decisions, and how they, in turn, had shaped Lucy's life. It wasn't a comfortable feeling, understanding her mother's struggles so intimately. It was almost as if she were intruding on a life that had always been separate from hers. Yet, with each page she turned, Lucy couldn't help but feel closer to her mother than she ever had before. In a way, it was as if her mother was speaking directly to her, telling her things she had never said when she was alive. One particular entry caught Lucy's attention. "I've never told Lucy how much I love her. I've always believed that love should be shown through action, not words. But lately, I wonder if she knows. I wonder if she feels it as deeply as I do. It's strange how love can sometimes feel like a burden, too. How can you protect someone you love when you don't even know if you're doing it right? I only want what's best for her, even if she doesn't see it now." Lucy paused, letting the words sink in. Her mother had always been distant with her emotions. She could remember times growing up when she longed for the affection that she saw other mothers giving their children. It wasn't that her mother didn't love her, Lucy now understood that her mother had shown love in her own way, through sacrifice, through providing, and through making sure Lucy never felt the weight of her own struggles. But Lucy had never known that her mother carried her own uncertainties about their relationship, about how she expressed love. Her heart tightened with regret. She had always wished her mother had been more affectionate, more open with her feelings. But now she understood that the love her mother gave had been more profound than she had ever known. It had been selfless, given with the quiet hope that Lucy would never feel the burden of her mother's insecurities. As Lucy sat back in her chair, her mind raced. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions, and she knew there was more to unravel. But the journal, the letters, everything was leading her toward a realization she had been avoiding. She needed to reconcile with her own life and the future she wanted to create. She couldn't keep living in the shadow of her mother's unresolved pain. She needed to forge her own path. It was that thought that brought her to the shelter the next day, where Mia was waiting. Mia had always been a steady presence in Lucy's life, someone who had offered her unconditional support when Lucy had been unsure of her own direction. And now, Lucy was starting to understand the importance of carving her own space in the world, of making her own choices, independent of the past. "Hey," Mia greeted her with a soft smile. "How's it going? You've been quiet lately." Lucy took a seat beside her, feeling the weight of everything she had learned in the past few weeks. She had been through so much emotional turmoil, learning about her mother's life, her regrets, and now, finally understanding her own. But she knew this moment would come, the moment when she would need to make a choice about what to do with all this newfound knowledge. "I've been thinking," Lucy said, her voice tentative. "I think I need to make some changes. I can't keep living in the shadow of my past, in the shadow of everything that's happened before. I've spent so long trying to figure out my mom's life, trying to understand everything she didn't say, but I need to start focusing on myself. I need to decide what my future looks like." Mia's expression softened, her eyes filled with understanding. "I think that's really important, Lucy. Sometimes, we spend so much time looking back that we forget to move forward. You've been holding on to a lot, and it's okay to let go." Lucy nodded, her mind made up. I've been carrying around so much guilt and so many questions, trying to figure out my mom's decisions, but I've realized that I can't let it control me anymore. I need to build my own life, my own happiness." Mia smiled, proud of her friend. "And I think you're going to do that. You're stronger than you realize, Lucy." Lucy felt a weight lift off her shoulders as she spoke the words aloud. She wasn't sure what her future would look like, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was in control. She could make her own decisions, live her own life, and shape her future based on her own experiences, not the echoes of the past. The conversation shifted to the daily workings of the shelter, but Lucy couldn't shake the feeling that this was a turning point. She was letting go of the past, of the guilt, the regret, the unspoken questions, and choosing to embrace the unknown. That evening, as Lucy sat down to read a few more entries in her mother's journal, she came across a passage that stopped her in her tracks. "I hope that when Lucy is older, she will understand why I did the things I did. I hope she will see that everything I did was because I wanted her to have a better life. I've made mistakes, but I've tried my best. And I hope that one day, she will forgive me for the things I couldn't do." Lucy's heart ached as she read her mother's words. She had always wondered if her mother had regretted some of the things she had done, things like pushing her away, being too hard on her, or keeping secrets. But now, reading those words, Lucy realized that forgiveness wasn't something her mother had just wanted from her, it was something that had to be given to herself, too. She felt the tears well up in her eyes, but this time, they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of release. Her mother had done the best she could, and Lucy had to let go of the anger and disappointment she had carried for so long. It was time to forgive. The days after Lucy's emotional breakthrough felt like a fresh start, though she knew that real change would take time. There was something liberating about finally shedding the weight of her mother's past, about embracing her own future with all its uncertainties. For the first time in years, Lucy felt like she was standing on the edge of something new, something she had the power to shape. The world outside seemed to have a different hue now. Her once monotonous routine felt lighter, her thoughts clearer. She had spent so much of her life haunted by her mother's choices and her own lingering questions about their relationship. But now, she was beginning to realize that her own path was still unfolding, that she had the ability to choose what came next. Lucy's job at the shelter, though it had always been fulfilling, now took on a new sense of purpose. She no longer viewed it as something she was doing to fill a void or to earn her place in the world. Instead, it became a source of personal strength, a way for her to connect with others who were also navigating their own struggles and challenges. It wasn't just her job that had changed, though. Lucy had started making small shifts in her personal life, too. She had finally contacted a few friends from her past, reaching out to them in ways she hadn't in years. She'd invited Mia to dinner on a Wednesday night, a simple gesture, but one that felt like a bridge back to a time before all the emotional baggage had built up between them. Mia, as always, was supportive, offering a gentle but firm nudge toward the changes Lucy needed to make. "You know, I've been thinking," Mia said one evening as they sat together in a cozy corner booth at their favorite cafe. "I think it's time for you to take the next step. I know things have been hard, but you've been holding on to your mom's stuff for so long. Maybe it's time to move forward. Have you thought about therapy?" Lucy paused, staring down at her cup of coffee. The idea of therapy had crossed her mind several times, especially after reading her mother's journal. But the thought of unpacking everything out loud to a stranger still felt intimidating. She had spent so long in silence, holding on to her pain, that the idea of confronting it head-on was daunting. "I don't know," Lucy admitted, chewing on her lip. "It feels like, so much. I don't even know where to start." "I get it," Mia said gently. "But think about it this way, what if you could make sense of everything you've been through, all the confusion and pain? What if it could help you not just move on from your mom's stuff, but from all the weight you've been carrying inside? It could be freeing, Lucy." Lucy mulled over Mia's words. Part of her wanted to dismiss the idea, to keep things the way they were, but another part of her, the part that had finally started to believe in the possibility of change, was curious. Could therapy really help her understand herself better, beyond what her mother's journal had offered? The more she thought about it, the more she realized Mia was right. She couldn't keep running from her past. She had spent so much of her life avoiding difficult truths, hiding behind her own insecurities. If she truly wanted to heal, to move forward in the way she was meant to, therapy might be the key. "I'll think about it," Lucy said, finally meeting Mia's gaze. "Maybe it's time to finally stop avoiding the things I've been running from." Mia smiled, her eyes filled with encouragement. "I think that's a great first step." The next few weeks passed in a blur of change and reflection. Lucy scheduled her first therapy appointment, feeling nervous but also strangely relieved. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew it was time to confront the things that had been holding her back. The therapy sessions, though challenging, became a space for Lucy to unravel the layers of grief, anger, and confusion that had built up over the years. Each session was like peeling back a new layer of her own emotional landscape. There were moments of intense vulnerability, but also moments of profound clarity. Her therapist, a calm and insightful woman named Dr. Ellis, helped Lucy realize that the journey she had been on wasn't just about understanding her mother, it was about understanding herself. Through their conversations, Lucy began to uncover the deeper reasons behind her own emotional struggles, many of which stemmed from her childhood and her relationship with her mother. Sometimes, we become so attached to the idea of how things should have been that we forget to acknowledge how things actually were, Dr. Ellis had told her during one session. Your mother's choices were influenced by her own pain, just as your reactions to her were influenced by your own experiences. What if you could start to see both of you as people doing the best you could, instead of holding on to these expectations of perfection? Lucy had left that session feeling lighter. She had spent so much time focusing on the mistakes of the past, on the things her mother hadn't done, that she had never really allowed herself to understand her own role in the relationship. Therapy wasn't just about healing from her mother's choices, it was about embracing her own humanity, flaws and all. As Lucy continued with her therapy sessions, the changes in her personal life became more noticeable. She started taking better care of herself, both mentally and physically. She exercised more, spent time doing things that brought her joy, and even started writing in a journal again. The words that had once been painful to write were now a source of healing, as she found herself reflecting on the progress she was making. One Saturday afternoon, after a particularly emotional session, Lucy took a walk in the park. The sun was warm on her face, and the crisp fall air was refreshing. As she strolled through the park, her thoughts wandered back to the journal entries she had read all those weeks ago. She hadn't read them in a while, but something about the peacefulness of the day made her want to revisit them. She reached into her bag and pulled out her mother's journal, sitting down on a bench by the lake. She flipped through the pages, her fingers tracing the words she had read so many times before. This time, however, she wasn't just looking for answers. She wasn't searching for closure or understanding. Instead, she found herself feeling a sense of peace, knowing that her journey was her own to take now. Lucy closed the journal with a gentle smile. She had learned everything she needed to from the past. Now, it was time to fully embrace the future. Lucy's transformation was not an overnight miracle, but it was unmistakable. The woman who walked through the doors of the shelter each morning now had a different energy about her, more grounded, more at peace with herself. The journey that had started with heartache and uncertainty was finally leading her to a place of true healing and empowerment. It was a cool autumn morning when she sat down at her kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft, golden light through the window. Lucy had grown fond of these quiet moments, where she could reflect on how far she had come. The past few months had been full of challenges, but with each step, she had come closer to understanding who she was and what she wanted from life. Her phone buzzed on the table, breaking her peaceful reverie. It was a text from Mia. Are you still up for dinner tonight? I know we haven't had a chance to just hang out in a while. I think it's time for some celebration. Lucy smiled, grateful for Mia's unwavering support. They had been through so much together, and she knew that their friendship had become a lifeline in her journey toward healing. Definitely. Can't wait to see you. I have a lot to share. As she put her phone down, Lucy felt a familiar sense of anticipation. Mia had been her rock through this entire process, always there when she needed to talk, to vent, or to simply sit in silence. Tonight, they would celebrate the milestones Lucy had reached, no matter how small they seemed. The dinner was held at their favorite local restaurant, a cozy Italian place with soft lighting and an intimate atmosphere. The waiter led them to a corner booth, and Mia wasted no time in ordering the usual, spaghetti for her and a fresh salad for Lucy. So, tell me everything. Mia said as she settled into the booth, her eyes bright with curiosity. How are you really feeling? And how's therapy going? Lucy took a deep breath, a small laugh escaping her lips. It's been incredible. I mean, it's been tough, but I feel like I'm actually starting to understand myself in a way I never have before. Therapy isn't always easy, but it's been helping me untangle a lot of things I've been carrying for so long. That's amazing, Mia replied, her voice full of warmth and pride. I knew you had it in you, Lucy. You've always been strong. But I'm glad you're taking the time to really heal. It's the most important thing you can do for yourself. Lucy nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude. I've learned so much. I've learned that healing isn't linear, it's messy and complicated. But I also realized that I can't keep living in the shadow of my mom's choices. I'm not her. I have my own path. Mia raised her glass. To new beginnings, then. Lucy clinked her glass against Mia's and smiled. To new beginnings. The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they enjoyed their meal, but Lucy couldn't help but reflect on the progress she had made. She had confronted her past, faced her fears, and learned to forgive, both her mother and herself. She had discovered that healing wasn't about finding closure or understanding everything, it was about accepting what had happened and choosing to move forward with grace. In the weeks that followed, Lucy continued to put the pieces of her new life together. She took up new hobbies, reconnected with old friends, and even began to explore her career options outside the shelter. She knew she had a lot of potential, and it was time to see where her talents could take her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she was no longer afraid to find out. One evening, while out for a walk, Lucy received an unexpected call from an old acquaintance, Elena, a former colleague who had always admired Lucy's passion for helping others. Hey, Lucy. It's Elena. I know this is random, but I have an opportunity that might be perfect for you. There's a nonprofit organization in town that's looking for someone to head their outreach program. They're looking for someone with experience in community work, and I immediately thought of you. Would you be interested in learning more? Lucy's heart raced as she listened to Elena's pitch. The idea of taking on a leadership role in a nonprofit organization was both thrilling and intimidating. She had always worked behind the scenes, helping others but never taking the spotlight. But something inside her stirred at the thought of stepping into a new role, one where she could truly make a difference. Wow, that sounds amazing, Lucy said, feeling the weight of the decision settle over her. I'd love to learn more. Can we meet up to talk about it? The days that followed were filled with excitement and a little bit of nervousness. Lucy met with Elena and the nonprofit team, and after several interviews, she was offered the position. It was a dream come true, and for the first time in her life, Lucy felt like she was on the right path. This was her chance to lead, to use her skills and experiences to help others, just as she had always wanted. But even more than that, this new opportunity symbolized the final step in her journey. It wasn't just about a new job, it was about embracing her power, her voice, and her potential. Lucy was no longer the woman who defined herself by her mother's choices or her past mistakes. She was the woman who had found her own way, who had built her own future. The following weeks were a whirlwind of excitement as Lucy settled into her new role. She dove into her work with passion, organizing outreach programs and connecting with the community. Every day, she felt more confident in her abilities, and more excited for the future. And through it all, Mia remained by her side, celebrating her successes and supporting her through the challenges. Together, they had come a long way, from the difficult moments of the past to the bright promise of the future. One evening, as Lucy sat on her balcony, gazing out at the city skyline, she couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over her. She had come so far. She had healed. She had found her own voice, her own strength, and her own path forward. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure: she was ready for whatever came next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?